Hey there, everyone. J Rower here. All right, today we've got a bit of a fun one. I'm going to be talking about mostly gear optimization, but it's going to be a bit rambly. We're going to talk about like stats, what to optimize for, when to optimize for, and why you're doing that. And so we're going to be going over a bunch of different topics, and I'm going to try to do it based on where you're at in game. So very early to mid game to late ish game to like super end game. So, without further ado, let's just jump right in. Okay, so first off, before we get into gear optimization, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Like, why are you picking certain pieces of gear versus others? And to do that, we're going to talk about these stats here. Now, my stat screen might be a little bit ridiculous, but just follow along. So, early on in the game, max HP is pretty important. It helps survivability, and you're gonna want a good chunk of it. Same thing with max MP. Um, so early on, those stats matter, and the stats also make a difference if you're AFK versus not. Max MP HP matters far less AFK than if you're active. And what I mean by active is like if you're actively fighting the characters with the mobs with auto on versus just having the game closed. Um, so if you're AFK, HP only really affects your survivability, but you can get your survivability extremely high using food that it's not as important to optimized for HP. Plus, it's also one of the stats that's relatively more difficult to improve early um, versus how much it costs. So, yeah, max HP early game kind of important if you're active. Mid to late game, it's really only important for mining efficiency. Once you can, I guess mid game, it it's a little bit important if you're trying to tank crystal mobs. But again, you could just use a piece of food and usually be fine. Once your FMJ levels enough, eight max HP doesn't really matter. So MP matters even less. Early game, you just want enough of it to cast your spells, but you reach that fairly quickly. I think it's like around, I would say around like 400 or 500 MP is more than enough to cast all your spells, regardless of class. Um, Maybe a little bit more, but yeah, you reach that fairly quickly. I have 60,000, and this isn't even max MP build. So max MP is okay early. Mid game, pretty much irrelevant. Late game, you only really use it for chopping efficiency uh, via the bubble, the alchemy bubble. And that was also what I meant by mining efficiency. HP only matters for mining efficiency later on, using this Hardy Diggy bubble and Hocus Chopus bubble for the MP. So you'll push those later on solely for that. But as far as importance to overall account progression and being able to do things, not really that important. It also slightly helps mages with their damage, but again, it's by power of 10, so it's not insane to focus on it. Next up, we have damage. Damage early on matters very little if you're AFK. Somewhat important if you're active, but honestly, early on, you really shouldn't be focusing on active play at all. Active play is something you kind of unlock during like the mid to mid, I would say mid game. Once you're finishing around World Two, um, you should be focusing more towards active play if you're willing to go into that. So, and then damage will start mattering then. Like end game, it doesn't, or like late-ish game, like World 3, World 4, damage doesn't matter almost at all. And then super end game, you'll start pushing damage again when you're trying to equip multiple HP prayers. So damage overall, just don't really worry about it. Even then, 9 of your 10 characters eventually won't care about it at all because they'll all be AFKing. So even later on, you'll only really need one damage set of gear. Um, as far as the stats go, stats early game kind of important. They're a good source of accuracy. You'll want gear optimized to your accuracy stat. This is just really efficient to push the accuracy early on. Once your accuracy bubble is high enough that you never need to worry about accuracy again, the stats matter a little bit less. They'll just be decent for pushing damage. But again, mid game to like late-ish game, like World 3, World 4, damage won't matter, so the stats won't really matter either. End game stats really do matter because you'll start going into money farming, and money farming is important because, or the stats are important to money farming because of the bubble. What is these 16s? Um, Penny strength, dollar of agility, nickel of wisdom, all very very important towards money farming. It's a good multiplier. So you'll push those later on. As you see, I have a lot of wisdom because this is my money farming bubonic conjure. Uh, so stats, I wouldn't really focus them early on. Luck is probably the best one early on because that'll increase your drop rarity very minimally and your class XP very minimally. Um, and not early on, mid game, luck will be your most important. Early on, your accuracy stat will be the most important. Mid game, luck will be most important, and then late game, your main stat will be most important. Main stat also will push your efficiencies towards sampling, so they'll be useful then. But I wouldn't focus on them until fairly late game. Early game, you just kind of push them as far as you can for accuracy. Crit chance early on doesn't really matter. Mid game doesn't really matter. Late game, I would say crit chance matters a bit. You'll want to be pushing 200 plus crit for again activating with HP prayers on. And when I mean HP prayers, I mean prayers that increase mob HP. So that's Big Brain Time, Jawbreaker, and Midas. You'll need a lot of crit chance to be able to effectively kill those mobs active. AFK, again, your damage will be so high AFK that they won't matter at all. Crit damage, same thing. It's an AFK multiplier. It helps. It'll do things, but it's incredibly difficult to increase crit chance and crit damage early and mid game and even late game. So there's just not enough sources of it to be worth focusing on. So you'll just kind of passively increase those later on. Accuracy early on actually matters a lot. Accuracy is quite an important stat early game. You'll be wanting to increase it via the Shakracy bubble. Where is it? Right here, Shakracy. You'll want to increase it via Shakracy and then equipping gear with your accuracy stat leveled a ton. So that would be agility for my mage class. And you could check which one is your accuracy stat by clicking on any of these stats, and the stat info will tell you. So accuracy for mages, accuracy for archers. That will be important early on. You'll want those stats to increase your accuracy because accuracy is fairly difficult to get rolling early. Later on, it starts going out of control because you get so many different percent increasers for it. And dungeons are a good early way to increase it. The dungeon upgrade towards accuracy is quite big. So yeah, early on, accuracy is important. Mid game to like late World 3, World 4 doesn't really matter at all. And then super end game, you'll push it again because it will then increase your crit chance via this book you'll unlock later on. And again, crit chance is really difficult to increase, so you'll be wanting to increase it via any way possible, and accuracy is one of those. So defense, defense only matters early on. Anytime else, it just doesn't matter at all. But defense early is actually pretty important because even with the use of food, it can be somewhat difficult to survive some mobs if you're pushing really fast through the worlds. Um, if you're using food correctly, it doesn't hurt too bad to have low defense, but later on when you're trying to use Forsaken and other defense lowering prayers and such, um, defense can matter a little bit, but overall, later on, you'll just naturally gain enough stats to be able to tank whatever mob you want and basically be unkillable. Um, Mid game, sometimes maybe you'll die to an E-font gun. Uh, it happens, the finger gun. But again, defense just only really care about it early on, and you'll get that via FMJ this level. And in conjunction with World 4's lab upgrade that's Knowable Left Behind, if you get that mid game to like breaking into end game, defense will stop mattering very quickly. So movement speed matters if you're bowman. That's about it. The movement speed otherwise is just kind of nice to have. It helps some things, but overall, it's just kind of luxury. If you're active, it technically can help kills per hour, but overall, just don't focus on move speed unless you're bowman. It's also quite one of the stats that are fairly difficult to increase on purpose. So there's just not great sources of it, and all the sources are pretty minimal increases. So drop rarity, most important stat in the game, pretty much early, mid, and somewhat late game, and just one of the most important stats overall. Drop rarity is insanely important. Increases the speed at which your account progresses, because you're gonna need mob materials. You're gonna need rare drops. You're gonna be farming for items to equip or upgrade your gear. All these things. Drop rarity goes into all that. So gear that increases drop rarity is important. And luck, which increases drop rarity, is nice. So we'll focus on that. Gear. There's few sources of drop rarity through gear specifically. Um, but the sources that they're quite good. Overall, your drop rarity is going to be something that you're going to get a lot of through obols, prayer, like the Midas minded prayer, various other sources. They're like small sources that build up over time. The shrine is quite a big one. So drop rarity, great, but not as important towards what gear you're choosing. Somewhat important, but we'll go over that in a sec. Class XP, Class XP, decent early on, mid game somewhat okay. Late game kind of doesn't matter. Um, Late game, you'll want it to go push for 250 character level and then breaking into 3000 obol slot. But after that, it's completely irrelevant, like super late game. So, but early game, it's nice. Early and mid game, it's nice. You'll use your class level to get a lot of talent points so that you'll be able to progress quickly that way. So early on, the when you if you get like a grandma's disguise, it's quite nice. Um, so yeah, that's the stats on this screen, but I'm gonna go over a couple more. Um, Anything that says multi-kill per tier is quite important. Very strong. AFK gains is generally one of the most powerful stats in the game. So it, I, I would say AFK gains is pretty much the most important stat in the game, but if you're active, it doesn't matter as much. That's why drop rarity is sometimes better. But overall, AFK gains and multi-kill per tier, I would value roughly equal. Anything that says respawn percentage on it, it's slightly lower than those two, but you'll be focusing those mm, pretty much towards the end of mid game and like breaking into late game. You'll want to be focusing on the like multi-kill per tier, AFK gains, respawn, and base multi-kill is usually bad. Base multi-kill, the sources of it are generally pretty low. But late game, basically, I would say take what you can get. So you'll focus on that like way later. But I wouldn't focus on it um, when you don't have enough resources to devote to it. And then super late game, like late game, you'll start farming money and just basically to push stamps, buy kitchens, other important expensive upgrades. And money multiplier is good. The ways to increase that are like green mushroom kills via the lab node, which I can show off really quick. Because someone will inevitably ask which lab node am I talking about. It is this lab node, and it gives you um, extra cash per green mushroom killed. So or million green mushrooms killed. Sorry. That one's important later on towards that. Stats, like I said, the money bubbles, these ones, stats will be very important towards that. Meals, pet arena. There's a bunch of different sources of money multipliers, and I'll go through those in another video. But later on, basically, money multiplier is important. So, all right. So with all that out of the way, what should you be focusing on? What gear should you be working towards at what point in the game? So, and then this depends on if you're active versus AFK. So, early on, you will probably be sitting in like iron armor just because it's fairly cheap to farm early, and then working towards Amarak armor. Amarak armor is kind of expensive early on, specifically the Woodula circles are, but it is quite cost efficient in the sense that Amarak armor gives you enough defense that it can probably carry you through like World 3 without much trouble. Um, so early on, gear slots, I would say Amarak armor, and then usually you'll be going with iron rings. The double goopy ring can also be kind of nice early just for the money percent. I used to use the double goopies a lot, but they've gotten outscaled, I would say. Iron rings is also fine early on. As far as pendant goes, you'll want to work up to the Amarok pendant. It just gives you a lot of slots, a lot of defense that you can put onto it. Um, and for weapon, just whatever weapon you can get a hold of. As far as weapon is concerned, I would basically say always use your highest one you can afford. Um, they're generally always better. Sometimes you'll want a wooden spear, depending on the situation and what class you are. Like Bowman with the wooden spear is quite good because it has the Extendo Rangio talent, which increases the spear's range, which then allows it to just attack a lot of targets. Same thing with Mage. Mage can teleport around with the spear, using the teleport skill, and it's actually pretty neat, decent. You'll want high attack speed though for that later on, but if you can manage it, spear has its uses. So, but as far as weapon is concerned, I would say almost always upgrade to the latest one. Okay, so that's like early game. Early game basically kind of scrape together what you can afford. Um, your characters will kind of just be in rags a lot of the time, maybe in the skilling gear because you can't afford to make multiple sets, which is fine. You know, that's just how it's going to be early on. Uh, Mid game, basically like end of World 2, breaking into World 3. Um, and towards the end of World 3. E-font gear, specifically the E-font ribcage and E-font hips, I would say are incredibly strong. They're very cost efficient, quite cheap to make for what they give you. Um, so yeah, you'll want to work towards this mid game. And as far as rings go, depending if you're doing dungeons or not, you can use some of the dungeon rings. Let's go take a look at those. I don't have any of them on hand. Uh, yeah, mid game you can be using like the XP ring, the Bejeweled ring. Tenacity is not bad, and you can work up towards the Black Emperor's Opal fairly quick nowadays. Emperor's Opal is going to be one of your best rings, pretty much till forever. um, so you so you'll be wanting to work up to that one. Sorry about that. Later on. Um, Bejeweled ring is not bad though. Early mid game. Tenacity ring, it gives you some damage, but overall it's not that important. So I really wouldn't waste more than the 2,000 that you need to get to Emperor's Opal on more tenacity rings. But Bejeweled ring is pretty cost efficient. Um, Same thing with the pendants from here. Deathly Cluster you can wear. They're not bad to wear on your characters. You'll only really need one because respawn's a little wonky, but um, having much of them on is not terrible. Hallowed Tale is not terrible either. Um, and then Persephone's you'll only be really using while skilling. So okay, so those are those. So back to this. E-font ring, I really wouldn't focus on any time at all. It's just too expensive to be really worth it. Um, you can go for the defense rings if you ever need defense, but again, by the time you can afford this reliably, it's probably already obsolete. Um, as far as pendant goes, I don't really recommend farming up the strong bludgeon just because it's not that big of an upgrade usually until you can break into Kizler's Caustic Scarf, which you can get from Blanky's. But Blanky is a rare drop, so as far as pendant goes, you can use the polished bludgeon, but honestly, I would probably just stick with chaotic hammerite pendant with just like defense stones or something rolled onto it. Um, so yeah, as far as mid game, I would say focus on that type of gear to go into, and then by then you'll probably also have a couple like rare drops. Like Grandma's Disguise is great early mid game. Um, you can also use like the specialized helmets, such as where is it? The Nugget Cake hat. This one gives you decent amount of multi kill, but this is base multi kill, so you'll probably just use that for sampling later. And then if when you're able to afford it, the E-Font helmet is actually quite strong because, as I said, drop rate is great. So anytime you can increase drop chance, drop rate, drop rarity, all the same thing, do it. Um, so breaking into mid to late game, this is when gear starts becoming more than what can you just afford. Because basically early and mid game, the reason I haven't gone like too in depth is it's just kind of down to what you can afford, and it's too difficult for me to know what you can and can't afford because it depends on what you're focusing. The metal armors are good for defense as well. Like gold armor is quite cost efficient for when you can afford it, so you can go into that as well. But that stage of gameplay won't last as long because earlier worlds have just gotten much easier over time. So breaking into late game, end game, whatever you want to call it, you'll start having options. So, end game, you'll probably be choosing between Kizor's helmet, Troll basically will be your best way later on. That's going to be your go-to because it just gives you higher stats. And stats will be your best way to increase damage, accuracy, everything. Um, percent stats is quite good. Like you could see, I get more damage just from wearing Troll Hat than I do Kizor. Um, if you're going for XP, the Grandma's Disguise is not bad. You can wear that over Troll, but it's just such a minimal effect that I would still go for Troll because it'll give you higher money overall. When you're first trying to um, active with HP prayers on, you'll want to be using something like like this, for instance, the Adornment of the High Priest. If you're using Bubonic Conjure, quite strong. It'll allow you to kill mobs earlier than your damage would normally let you. So, late game, you'll be wanting to focus in on that. Um, for the pendant slot, you're gonna be wanting to get Kizler's Caustic Scarfs on everyone. But you'll see I'm not using it right now, and the reason why is look at my wisdom, 7295. I'm actually getting less wisdom with the caustic scarf, and I don't need the damage. I would rather have the money that this gives. So, for instance, we'll just go like to spores, and you can see that this gives more money. So I'm getting this much: 10, 36, 77, 58, 84, 10, 8. So we're losing out on 30 or 26. No, yeah, 26, no, 28. Um, platinum. So you'll want to be optimizing towards your stat that you're trying to farm for money, because that's where I'm at in the game. I'm trying to farm for money. I don't need the damage. If I needed the damage, I would be using Caustic Scarf, but I don't need it, so um, you'll be wanting to think about those kinds of things late game. If you're AFK, Time Rings will basically always be your best in slot. Um, if you're trying to farm money AFK, Opals are technically better sometimes, but most of the time, in generally. Uh, but AFK farming money is pretty bad. So I would still use time rings for the added drops and all that goes with them. So XP, all that stuff. Um, so yeah, for gear late game, I would say basically work towards troll. A good in between is Cheezer set. It's quite cost effective again for what it is. The, basically the boss gear is really strong, as you can guess. Um, as far as rings go, it's pretty much just opal versus time rings as if you're fighting. For skilling, it's a bit more complicated than that. So we'll hop over to my cook to give it an explanation. So right now, you'll see I have this much efficiency. Um, if I swap over to the Dawn Ring, you'll see I've actually gone down, even though I gained AFK percent, because the efficiency gain on Rex Ring is better. So basically, you'll want to mix and match and see what gives you the highest amount of gains. And the AFK screen makes it fairly easy to do that. Um, Chef Ring, unfortunately, just kind of not great. 671. It is okay, but you see I'm losing some amount of efficiency. So if I put both of them on, I'm actually just lower. 639. So yeah, you'll be for skilling. It's generally going to be serrated Rex Ring for all cases, but there are some niche cases where Dawn Stopwatch is better. And then as far as pendant goes, it's pretty much always Persephone's, but very rarely the upgraded fishing pendant. This one is decent. So sorry, I got a little. I hope it's not cold, but anyway. Um, so yeah, late game you'll be focusing on that. Opals, time rings. Um, I'm going with the chaotic Emmerich pendant because I'm specifically on a mage. If I was not on a mage, I would probably be using something else. Most likely a Kizer's Caustic Scarf. Yeah, I'd pretty much always be using Kizer's Caustic Scarf. If you have Steam pendants, congratulations, you're better than I am. They're quite good. I would probably be using them on everyone. Um, and then as far as gear goes, I would be working towards Troll on everyone, but just use Cheezors in its place. For tools, just work up to the highest tools you can afford. There's not really much to say. They're there. Focus on your tool of that class first, but eventually you'll want to get Starfire on everyone because it gives you the most amount of stats. Okay, so for premiums, um, basically any premium helmet versus premium ring is like good. It's just a chunk of stats you can put on your character, which early and mid game you won't really care about. Late game, it's kind of nice. Um, you know, I'm getting 200 wisdom from it, or 250 wisdom from it, which is decent. Quite strong. It's a whole money tier. um, if you have access to it, Beach Bro is quite strong if you're money farming late game, but trophy in general really doesn't matter. The best trophy in the game uh, generally is like Critter Baron for archers. King of Food is something you'll really want to go for, and is pretty much good in all cases. Blunder Hero if you're cooking or skilling. But Blunder Hero can lose to King of Food, and generally does if there are boost foods involved. So yeah, a trophy. There's really no. 100% optimal one. Lucky lads are quite strong because again, drop rate is very nice. Megalodon if you need crit, but I wouldn't waste the trophy slot for it. As far as wings go, active troll wings are best. AFK, the AFK wings are best. If you don't have those or enough of those, put whatever you want. They're kind of just decoration after that point. Like optimally, you would have the two AFK wings on two characters, and the rest of your characters would have troll wings, but that's unrealistic, so don't worry about that. So yeah, late game, you'll be wanting to work towards boosting your stats for money farming, and boosting your damage up to the point where you need it, and then getting drop rate gear. So yeah, as far as that goes, that's pretty much what I would say for gear optimization. I know this was a bit more of a rambly one, like I said beginning. I knew it was going to be, but there's too many variables involved for me to make it as concrete of a guide as I usually like doing, which is why I'm formatting it more of as a talk on the various stats and why and when to focus them. So hopefully this helps. I can't help feeling like all I did was just say random things for however long this video is run, but again, hopefully that's okay. Anywho, that's pretty much all I have to say on that matter. If there's any specific questions in the chat, in the comments, go ahead and post them. And yeah, I will answer them when I can. As far as the next video goes, I'm not 100% certain what I will be doing yet. I'll probably be doing a not specifically Maestro, but I'll probably do it on Maestro just because that's the character with the weakest damage. But like a damage pushing guide of sorts, and when and why you push damage and how far and all that kind of fun stuff. But if this video format where I'm kind of just talking about random things, a little bit less structured, is good, let me know. So yeah. Oh, and I did make a PayPal account. Well, I've had a PayPal account, but I've set that up. Some people were asking about donating, so it will be in my bio. Um, Maybe I'll put it in the description of this video as well. If you want to help out, that's super appreciated, but don't worry about it. So just some people were asking, and I think that's like the easiest way for me to do it at the moment. Um, Maybe I'll pursue other options like a Patreon or something later on, but I don't know. Anywho, hope this video helps and hope you all have a wonderful day.